All right, let's get started with our Ask the Admin training session for this week. Today we'll be covering forecasts and how you can provide forecasting within Salesforce. So let's get into the training today. Again, it's forecasting in Salesforce. First, we're going to talk about some of the different options that Salesforce provides for you to do this, and then we'll hop over and show you how you could get started setting that up and customizing it. Forecasting is one of the more complex modules. It is included with the purchase price of Professional and Above, Enterprise, and Unlimited. Would also have forecasting. But a lot of people don't take advantage of it. It's not turned on by default, so sometimes people don't know it's available. It also does take a little bit of management to set it up in the first place and to keep it running smoothly. It also depends on the method that you choose to implement for forecasting as to the level that will be needed for ongoing management support. That's what we're going to cover and talk about next. So the different forecast options, there's really two main options, and within there's a couple of tracks you could go down. The first one is collaborative forecast, and this is the default that's set up since Winter 12. So if you purchased Salesforce in the past year, you probably have collaborative forecast turned on unless you've purposely changed it over. To change from collaborative forecast to customizable forecasting, which I'll show you next, you actually do have to open a case with Salesforce. So unless you've done that, you probably have collaborative forecast, and it would look similar to the screen that you're seeing here. Some of the benefits that collaborative forecast adds when compared to customizable forecast is you can have a default forecast currency setting, and you can also view it in local currency. So you can just toggle back and forth on your screen from your standard currency, perhaps US dollars, and then also see it in local currency. This is assuming that you have multi-currency enabled in your organization. You also can expand forecast tables. The view is a little more dynamic. I'll show you this in examples so you can see what I'm talking about. On customizable forecasting, it does resize to the page, but that's about it. You can't drag columns around and make them bigger, which you can with collaborative forecasting. It's a little more user-friendly in the interface sense. You also can rename categories. With customizable forecasting, you can rename the forecast category field, but when you actually go to the tab, it still only will say pipeline, best case, and commit. Whereas with collaborative forecasting, you could rename those, and some people like to have, forecast, upside, pipeline, just different things, and you can actually do that with collaborative forecasting. Some of the limited functionality, however, with collaborative forecast, again, compared to customizable forecasting, is you are limited to one opportunity list view on the tab. So as we saw on this example, you have your forecast summary, and this is similar and the same on both collaborative and customizable forecasting, and you also have an opportunity section. With collaborative forecasting, you can define these columns in the order, but you can only have one view, whereas with customizable forecasting, you could have different views, open, closing in the next 30 days, similar to those list views that you could have on the opportunities tab. Also, list views are not filterable or by sorted columns. So on customizable forecasting, when we show you that, you could click a column heading like opportunity name or account name and sort by that column, and then you could click the letters that are displayed to filter down to find a company that starts with A or B. You are not able to do that with collaborative forecast views. Probably the biggest thing that's different is quotas with collaborative forecasting have to be loaded through the API. They're not added on the user page. So that's not really a big deal, I would say, because for the most part, you're wanting to load quotas in mass. I mean, if you have more than 5 or 10 users, it wouldn't really make sense to go through all those user records anyway. But if you ever wanted to quickly adjust someone's quota or have end users adjust the quota, it does make it difficult because usually they're not allowed to work through the API, and also you'd have to explain that, or making one change through the API is sometimes a little tedious. So those are some of the main differences that you have with collaborative forecast. The second option is customizable forecast. And within there, that's where you have the two tracks you could really go down. The first and primary one and the standard one that's enabled by default is customizable forecast through the role hierarchy. What that means is whatever you set up and define on your role will be reflected in the forecast. One rep rolls up to one manager. That manager views, that rep and all the other reps that roll up to that manager on the forecast tab, and that's about it. This, when you enable customizable forecasting, will be the default. You do have to request that the other option, which is territorial forecast, be enabled. So if you haven't done that and you have customizable forecasting, which looks like what you see on the screen right now, you probably have it role-based. You would also be able to tell a difference because there is a separate pick list field for the territory when it's enabled. I'll show you that in the screenshot in a second. Some of the differences and benefits with customizable forecasts, especially when compared to collaborative forecasts, and this is talking about the role hierarchy model. One of the big things is you can do product family forecasts. So if people have different quotas for software versus hardware, that is enabled through customizable forecasting. You also have the ability to share forecasts with users who normally would not be able to. They don't necessarily have to have view all forecasts, but you can manually share one manager's forecast with another manager's forecast who normally wouldn't be able to just through the role hierarchy, and you want to just add that in addition to their sharing settings. You also can do snapshots with a batch submit, so you can go back and do forecast history reporting. Territory management, again, like I mentioned, it's almost a whole nother aspect of itself, but it is a portion of customizable forecast. We'll go into that in a bit more detail on the next slide. Also, one of the differences with customizable forecast, and this is a common question that you may get, is the aggregate summaries on the forecast tab is actually displayed to reflect aggregate information from the prior categories. So I've put this little circle chart on here to show you kind of how that looks. So what it means is when you see pipeline, it's actually the sum of all open opportunities. And best case is the sum of all open opportunities from, if your best case starts at 50% and above. The way I usually explain it to users is when you look at it, you would say, if I were to close everything 50% and above, this is what my end number would be. It would still include closed, won, and commit, and also my best case. So that would be the aggregate sum. Same thing with commit. If I were to close everything 75% and higher, wherever your commit starts, this is where I would end. If that number is the same as your closed won number already, you know you actually don't have anything else left in commit. So, ergo, if you were to close everything, you would still be at the same number. I'll show this in more detail when we get over into Salesforce, and it might make more sense there. But if you do get that question and people wonder about it, I just usually explain it in that manner. So the second track you can go down with customizable forecast is a territory model. Now, this is what it looks like on the screen, and here's the pick list that I mentioned. You can see that this person is a member of 3 different territories. Now, the main reason you would use territorial forecast over role-based forecast is when a rep, a single sales rep, would report to more than one manager, depending on where that opportunity fell. A common case that I see this used is field sales reps have an individual territory, but an inside sales rep may cover 3 or 4 territories. A couple of those territories might roll to the central manager, for example, and a couple territories to the east manager. So the field reps, nothing is really different in that scenario, but that inside rep, they would have half of their opportunities wanting to give, quota relief and credit and pipeline management tracking to the central manager, and the other half of those opportunities to the east manager. That's what territorial forecast allows you to do. Each opportunity is actually assigned to the territory that it should be a part of. Let's show you that in a little more detail right here. Some of the considerations with territories, like I mentioned, opportunities will have a new field, which is actually a lookup to a territory. it has to be populated for that opportunity to ever appear in the forecast tab. One of the drawbacks with that is you actually can't make that a required field. So it is easy to get missed sometimes. You do kind of have to watch and monitor that. For users, this makes it a little easier though. For users in one territory, working on an opportunity from an account with only one territory, those territory assignments are made automatically. However, if multiple territories exist on the record, then there are some rules that will come into play that I have on the next slide. Just to break that down, what that means, going along with that field and sales rep scenario, if the field rep is only a member of one territory and that account is only a member of one territory that field rep overlaps with, the assignment's made automatically. For that inside sales rep, however, all of their territories on their account will both include inside sales central and inside sales east because it could fall into either of those managers. So every time that rep creates an opportunity, they would have to assign the territory. Other examples of ones where they fall into multiple territories, if you have a separate territory for third-party sales, a lot of times all opportunities and all accounts could actually be a part of a third party, but most of the time they're going to be managed on a geo region by a field sales rep or an inside sales rep, although they would still include a separate territory in the account. Accounts can be in multiple territories, opportunities can only be in one. This slide breaks it down in a little bit more detail. It just kind of shows what happens when the lead owner belongs to the same and only territory as the account, or when there's multiples. These slides will be shared with the recording of this webinar, so if you want to check this out in more detail, it will be there. It's also on the Salesforce Help and Training website. This just breaks down everything I just went over about the main differences between customizable forecasts and collaborative forecasts. It's also available on the help site. If you were just to search on different forecast options, you would get this result, and we'll go to some more detail on some of these points as well. All right, so let's get over to Salesforce now, and we're going to start showing you how you can configure forecasts and actually get up and running with this, get this using. There's not too many steps, as you'll see from the slide, to set up customizable forecasting. One of the first steps, though, that you're going to do is actually define your opportunity stages into a forecast category. The default that's set up for those is actually all of your open opportunities are set to pipeline. So if you've never done this, that is probably what you'll see is all of your opportunities are set to pipeline. Let's come over here. And in this case right now, we're seeing a live example of collaborative forecasts. Some of the things, just to mention, that we showed before is the resizable columns. You can definitely drag those around. You can also show or hide your opportunity list view. Some of the things that are similar, you can still change the range as you can with collaborative forecasts, which I'll show you in a second. I could change this out, look at a year at a time, for example. And same thing, it would address both your opportunities view and your forecast view. I can also display my options in a percentage of quota attainment if I have quotas entered, and also I can show or hide the quota column really easily. Here's how I mentioned displaying a currency. In this instance, this is a single currency org, so my only option is US dollars. If I have multi-currency, however, the option to change is right here on the forecast page, and it makes it fairly easy. I can also look up other users' quotas using the jump to lookup right here. To set up customizable forecasting, it makes it a little easy because I do have just the forecast setup link right here. I can also go to my name and the setup menu and the forecast tab within there and make any changes and customizations that I want for that page. That's what we're going to do for these purposes right now, is go to the setup menu because I want to show you step one, changing your opportunities forecast category. To do that, you would just customize opportunities and go to the fields, and you would find your stage field. Now, you may have changed your stage names, and if you have, then great. And you will notice that stages always have a corresponding forecast category. Now in this example, since this is collaborative forecasting, this organization has actually renamed the forecast category. So instead of having pipeline, best case, and commit, they refer to them as pipeline, upside, and forecast. So that's what you see here, but you can see that I do have a fairly healthy divide of these open opportunities are into the pipeline category, these are upside, these are forecast. There are some general best practices on how you define those. For most purposes, the pipeline, and this is in standard terms, pipeline, best case, and commit, the pipeline reflects 50% and lower. Best case is usually about 50 to 75%, and commit is about 75 and above, all the way up to closed one. And of course, closed one is always 100%, and it's in the closed category. Really, that can vary based on your business, your organization, the stages that you actually go through, the sales cycle, and the timing. So analysis is usually performed just if you have enough of the historical data to go through and see what your actual win rates are, and you can come up with your method for tracking those forecast categories. Once you do, this is where that would be defined. So let's take a look at our next step, which is defining the fiscal year. Even if you're using the standard year, you do need to make sure that your year is set up. Usually the easy way, I just like to do the quick find over here, so not to toggle so much, and I'm just going to go to fiscal year, which is found under the company profile. In this case, I can see that I'm really on just the standard fiscal year, which is fine. If you have set a customized fiscal year, let me actually show you kind of the same action in this org, which does have a custom fiscal year. Same thing, I'm just going to search on fiscal real quick and open up that menu. And I can see now that I have a standard as well as a custom fiscal year option. And I can go through and say, yes, that works. I'm going to enable it. And when I do that, I'm actually going to find what the start periods are. And I can also put like a quarter or a period prefix. So usually it's, the FY versus the CY. And I can go through and I can set up those custom fiscal years. If you're on the standard one, you really don't have to do too much with that option. The next thing you want to do is set your forecast settings, date, type, default view, and sharing. And this, you'll have a couple other options. Now, we're in customizable forecasting for this. You do have the same steps on collaborative forecasting as well up to this point. So let me hop over, though, and show you this in actually a customizable forecast before we do collaborative. So in this organization, this one has customizable forecasting. It is not territory-based, though, so there will be some differences with that. I'm just going to type in forecast over here. I'm going to see forecast in parentheses customizable. That's an easy way to know which version you're using. And then I'm going to go to settings. So the settings that you have in here, these go back to some of the functionalities that I mentioned before, using product family and those type of things. This is where you would actually enable that or utilize it. If I'm using product families and products, it's usually where it makes more sense to forecast a quantity. Unless you were doing something more like a number of opportunities, number of deals instead of revenue, it really wouldn't make sense to use quantity unless you were also using products. When you then use products and quantity, you can have a set number of units scheduled to sell for the period, the month or the quarter, whatever you'd like your forecast to be run on. And that is defined here in forecast period. So I can define it by a fiscal period, which in this case would be the year, or I can also use a fiscal quarter. For the forecast date, this is where you can get into more detail too with products. And this is really only applicable if you utilize product schedule. So products is one thing with the product families, but if you don't actually schedule those products to be fulfilled, they're still just the same as opportunity close date, and you can leave it there. However, if you use product schedules, meaning I book this opportunity today, but I'm going to collect revenue on it for the next 12 months on a schedule, which is every month I have one schedule for 12 times, which is 1/12 of the total, or it could be 12 times repeating. If you would like more information about product schedules, go ahead and look that up on Salesforce Help and Training. And when you do that, you can actually use product date. So that opportunity, in that example, that single opportunity would actually be shown 1/12 over the next 12 months of the forecast instead of the full amount right now, which just goes to a comparison of whether you want to base this on bookings or planned recognized revenue. So those are the options you have to use with that. Also, here is where you can choose whether to use the overall forecast or product family. As soon as you enable product families, you would have a pick list similar to what we saw for the territory, but for product family. So that's where I could have one forecast for my hardware sales and another forecast for my software sales. You can even have different quotas, and of course all of your opportunities would roll up into different places. Just keep in mind in that scenario, the same opportunity could be on both forecasts. You might have half of those sales from one opportunity, contributing to hardware, and the other half to software, and that's completely fine. You would only see half of that value because it's actually based on product line totals, not the opportunity amount, and same thing with the software one. You have half of the value or whatever the distribution of those values should be. When you define a product family, you would have a default, but if not, then that wouldn't be an option to choose from. You can then choose the default range starts. This is just when I go to the tab, at first, so I don't have to move around too much. I can choose when to start. One thing with this is it is a little frustrating. Most people want to do the start of the fiscal period, so the beginning of the quarter. But that means that when it's the first month of the quarter, I need to set this to current period, and next month I need to come in and set it one period ago, and the final month of the quarter I need to come in and set it to 2 periods ago. And that's just a little twerk you gotta deal with and change every month if that's the case, or you just leave it, 1 period ago would always be last month, but you wouldn't be seeing a full quarter, for example, by default when you logged in. You can also set the default range duration. So in the example I just mentioned, like if you usually want to see a quarter, it would be set to this. So 1 period ago and 3 periods, considering we're in July, would be the quarter starting in June. And then you can also set revenue or quantity numbers. In this case, we're only doing revenue, but as soon as I enable quantity, I can do revenue or quantity or both. And then you can also turn on or off the forecast sharing. So like I mentioned, this forecast sharing allows administrators and forecast managers who have the correct permission to share forecast data with other users that they normally would not be able to just as defined through the role hierarchy. So you can turn that on or off as an administrator. So once you've got these set up and decided how you want to run things, you're really ready to use customizable forecasting internally, and then you just need to really roll it out to your users. In order to do that, you're going to add quotas, and then you're also going to set user permissions. Let's show you how you do that real fast. Now, since this is customizable forecasting, quotas are on the user record. In collaborative forecasting, when I'll hop over, there's no quotas on the user record. I just have to do it through the API. But for these purposes, let me show you how that looks. If you were just doing this manually, like I said, you would probably still use the API to load records for quotas for hundreds of users, more than a handful of users. But if you were making a quick change, you definitely could come in here and do it, which is definitely helpful. So on a user record, as long as they have allow forecasting checked on their record, they will have a quota section. Now, in this one, where this is role-based and not territory-based, when I go to edit and add the quota, I'm really just defining it per month. Let me show you what it looks like when I have a territory model, though. Over here in this org, it's territorial-based. Before we move from this page, let me just show you. Here I have the territory options. So this person, in this case Brandon, he can have 3 different forecasts, really. He could have 3 quotas, and his opportunities will contribute to the forecast as he's defined on the opportunity itself through the territory cells. Let's go ahead and look at what quotas look like for a user like this. On the user record, same thing as before, allow forecasting needs to be checked. I still have the quotas as a section. But now when I go to edit the quotas, you'll notice that I actually have to assign each quota to a territory. So this is a different user, but in this case it would have 4 territories. I would actually have to define the quota on those periods for different times. And they might be the same, they might be completely different. So you would go through and you would do this for all users. You'd add their quotas in place. You'll notice I can choose when to start, and I can look up to 6 periods at a time. So that would help a little going through. If you do quick save, it just saves your work and you could go to the next period. Whereas if you click save, it saves the record but then goes back to the user page. So if you're continuing on, I would just do quick save and continue. Once you've got quotas set up, you can go ahead and enable users to access this. So as you noticed on the user page, I do have the forecast, allow forecasting checkbox. That needs to be checked on any user that will be utilizing the tool. There are also several options for the profile. Go to this one, for the profile, that you also need to enable. And if you have the enhanced user interface, you can search for this. I also usually just search in the browser for forecast, as there are a couple options for that. So override forecast, this can be on or off, and this just depends. What this does is this allows managers to override what a forecast is saying by default. What they can override on that is opportunity close date as well as forecast category. Now, to be clear, the override means you're not actually changing the opportunity. It's more just for your forecast. You, as a manager, are saying, I know the rep thinks this is going to close this month, but personally, I don't think it's going to close until next month. It doesn't change the opportunity, but it now does not appear in your forecast for this month. Same thing with forecast category. It might be falling into best case just by the defined stage and forecast category relationship, but as a manager, you may want to say, I know that that's closing and I'm going to put it into commit. That's one of the options you have. You also have view all forecasts. So if you weren't using forecast sharing and you didn't have this enabled, that person can only view their own forecast or people below them in the role hierarchy. If you enable view all forecast, they can then view any forecast. Also view all data, if you had this checked, would automatically check view all forecast. They go hand in hand. So just be aware of that. You also have one other option for editing personal quotas and also managing quotas. So in general, a system administrator would only be the one managing quotas for all users. But if you do want to allow individual reps or even managers to edit a personal quota, you can turn that on and you can have people go in and do it themselves. I've seen this used in a case where people use the quota more as a commit number. So a rep can go in once a month and put in what their quota or commit number is and then use that for forecast tracking as well. So once you've enabled those permission sets, you've got all your quotas set, you're really ready to go ahead and start using customizable forecasts. All of this information can also be found on the help site. If you go through there, it'll explain these steps in a little more detail. For collaborative forecasts, we have some of the same actions for setting it up. Of course, you want to set your forecast categories. This one can be a little customized, like we saw in the first example. You do want to set forecast settings, which is a little bit different. So let me go ahead and show you how that looks. This is back to the org with collaborative forecast. And over here, I'm just going to type in forecast to find my settings. Notice that here, it does not have the parentheses customizable. So that's also how I know that this is not customizable forecasting. It's collaborative instead. So I'm going to go to those settings and show you how they're a little bit different than what we saw on the customizable forecast settings page, but not too much. I can turn on or off the forecast here. That's one thing that's different. You still have revenue or quantity-based forecast that you can display. You can also define your start range as well, and whether it's monthly or quarterly. These are the same settings we had before. Here's one of the differences, though. As mentioned, for customizable forecasting, you can have your opportunity list views on the forecast page itself, and you can have several different ones. For collaborative forecast, you have one list view, and it's defined here. So like I said, you can add and remove columns and move them, in different orders, but you have one view to work with. Whereas with another use, collaborative or customizable forecasting, you actually can use different views. Let me just show you how that looks real fast to make sure that we're on the same page there. On this one, I have forecasts and I have opportunities, and I actually can have different views, and you can see these are pretty customized. I can say, just show me my $20,000 bills or higher type of thing, and several different ones, whereas on collaborative forecasting, just one view. I can also choose to use quotas or not with collaborative forecasts, and I can also enable adjustments, which is similar to the override forecast functionality that we saw on customizable forecasting. So those are some of the options that we have there. You also would want to customize your forecast hierarchy. So with this, you'll notice I have forecast and I have forecast hierarchy. We also had the same thing on the collaborative one. Again, these are based just from the role. So if I've already set up my role, then I already have my forecast hierarchy defined. This would only be different if I have territories, which if we have the time, I'll show you that for a minute. Adding quotas. So again, for collaborative forecasts, you can only add quotas through the API. There are instructions on how to do this just through Data Loader on the Salesforce Help and Training website. You can also set a forecast category. If you're a multi-currency org, you would set what your default is. And then again, set user permissions and enable users to access the forecast tab. They would have the same settings that we saw on customizable forecasting though. If I go to a profile, let me open this one. Same thing, if I were to search on forecast, you would see that I have the override forecast option. The view all forecast is still an option. Quotas, however, is a little bit different. Here I have the manage quotas. That means I can load them through the API, but you'll notice I do not have edit personal quota. That's because there's not a quota section for an end user to edit anyway. So they would actually have the capability to manage all quotas if you were letting them edit their own quota. Just keep that in mind. All right, so we do have a couple minutes, so let me just show you real quickly what a territorial hierarchy would look like over here. So if I go to the setup menu, and on this instance where it is a territorial forecast base, when I type in forecast, it's still customizable. I'll see settings and that Schmidt in the hierarchy. But I also would want to be looking at territories. You'll notice I have territory settings and I also have a territory hierarchy. It's a little bit confusing because when you use territorial forecast, there is still a hierarchy for the forecast, but that actually doesn't do anything. It's still there, and sometimes people get confused that they need to keep both of those updated, or especially if they make a change to the forecast hierarchy instead of the territory hierarchy, that it doesn't do anything, and that's the reason why. So once you've enabled territorial forecasting, you want to make changes, you want to manage that hierarchy, you need to do it through manage territories and hierarchy. So when I click into this right now, it doesn't look too bad, but you can see in this organization, they actually divide it kind of by product, and there are a couple other things in there like academics and federals, which are different territories. If I expand this up, you can see some of those other breakouts. So with territories, what that actually does is you define rules that make an account be part of a territory. So these can get very complicated. It would be a whole nother Ask the Admin discussion to go through kind of what you can do with this. But just as a high-level overview, you create assignment rules that would define that account as being part of a territory. So if it's as simple as this is east, west, central type thing, you can just say if state equals this, 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 or this, then it's an east territory. What that does is that when the account is part of a territory, then the opportunity can be assigned to a territory. If the owner is in conjunction with the account territory, it happens automatically. If the account's not part of a territory by default, or you don't have a rule, then it never gets assigned, and you actually have to make that selection twice as an end user. You have to assign the account to a territory and also the opportunity to a territory. So what you would do is you'd go through, you'd set up those rules, you'd have members be part of the territory, and then they would be able to, when they create opportunities from those accounts, have the opportunity listed in the correct territory. Users by default, if they work an opportunity that is part of an account territory, even if they're not generally a member of that territory, they'll start appearing on this list. So a lot of times you can get cross-sells, whether it was intentional or accidental, where a rep is not part of that territory, but for whatever reason, they have an opportunity in that territory. Suddenly that opportunity owner now has 2 territories to pick from on their forecast, even though they really are only a member of 1 territory. So that's a consideration with this as well. Again, this can be a very complicated model, so if you do have questions about territorial forecasting or interested in enabling it, you can reach out, you can let us know, we can walk you through how to get started with that, and of course, we'd be happy to help you with it. Again, it's something you have to have enabled by Salesforce, and of course, they would recommend that you do it in the sandbox first, try it out, make sure that works, because once you enable territorial forecasting, there is no going back to role-based forecasting. So keep that in mind. And that's really everything that we have for forecast. This was very high level. I know it took quite a bit of time, but again, forecast is a pretty complicated model to work with. You do need to, kind of be aware of all the moving parts, everything that you as an admin would need to define, and all the interaction that your end users will be taking from that point forward as well. So if you have other questions, definitely let us know. My name is Carolyn, and I would be happy to help you with any needs that you have regarding forecasting or any other Salesforce needs that you're interested in. Thank you for your time today.